Setting a screen. It was Carey. Boy, looking for a little bit of room. Feed to Carey, a little bit of space, and he did it! Bouncer Dan Carey, his first goal of the year, and as a Toronto Rock.
You kind of grow up, for me, you just had that mentality that you got to be tough and you got to go back in and play. And I tried to do that, and ultimately it didn't work out for me.
A concussion can happen to anyone, any sport, any age, at any time.
It doesn't need to be a big hit. It can be any number of ways that an individual can get a concussion.
I think many athletes fear a concussion. So I think people need to remember, just like any other sports injury, these are treatable. These are things that we can help you recover from. And I want them to know with the right treatment, with the right assessments, they can get better and that they will be returning to the things they love.
I believe I was 4 years old the first time I had a lacrosse stick. My dad brought one home one day from work and signed me up for minor lacrosse in Peterborough. And I don't remember this, but I'm told that I slept with it that first night and probably the first couple of weeks. And I believe I cried, or I was told I cried that morning because I wasn't allowed to bring it to school. So for whatever reason, I fell in love with it really quickly and at an early age. I remember getting hit a lot. I wasn't very big, so I had to learn how to be crafty and elusive, and I really took pride and worked a lot on my stick skills. I don't know if I'd be considered a playmaker or goal scorer, maybe a little bit of both.
I'm Dr. Shannon Bauman. I am a sports medicine physician. I am a clinician, I am a researcher, I write guidelines on concussion, but first and foremost, I am an athlete, former concussion patient, and I really feel passionate about being able to be that trusted medical opinion and being a part of each athlete's journey, from your weekend warriors to your young developing athletes to professional athletes. I really enjoy the work I do as a sports medicine doctor. Back in 2014, I went from being the athlete, being the sports medicine physician, to actually being the patient with the concussion. I decided when I'm well, I'm going to create a concussion center and I'm going to manage this in a different way. That was really my goal, was to bring my experience and my research together with developing and recruiting a clinical team to put forth really new advances in how to treat concussion.
This is the Lakers. One day you might play for the Lakers too. It was a sport that I really enjoyed being involved with. Played all through minor lacrosse and junior A. Was fortunate enough to play college lacrosse as well. And once I get into professional lacrosse, drafted by Colorado, what a thrill. My parents were actually at my first game in Colorado. My mom, up to that point, she had never been on a flight, so they drove 24 hours to come and see me play, and I wouldn't have had that experience if it wasn't for them, and how they committed their time to help me pursue a goal and something that was really important to me. Pretty cool experience for somebody coming from a small town in Peterborough, and so much pride in just being a professional lacrosse player. I believe I was 26 when I had my first concussion.
Concussions has always been a part of sport. It's an injury that's happening in the brain. It can be caused by a direct impact to the head, so an elbow to the head or an impact from another player directly to the head. But the other thing is it can be caused by an indirect injury, meaning you could land really hard on your shoulder. There's a force that goes back and forward, or a rotational force that happens. There's a force that's transmitted up through the brain, causing a functional injury. The brain is allowed so much movement because each day we might naturally move our head up and down or turn our head sideways, and each time we do that, we don't get a concussion. But what happens is that force exceeds what the brain can keep in check.
I was playing in Portland, and they had these, couple players that were 6'6", 6'7", and much bigger than I was. For whatever reason, I tried to use the top of my head to push them away from a loose ball, and it didn't work out in my favor.
So when that impact is more than our brain can keep in check, there's some things happening at a very small level of the brain called cells and neurons. Things leak out that should stay in. Things that are outside leak in. The brain reacts by not allowing as much blood flow to those areas of the brain than it normally does. Meaning, at the very time your brain wants more energy to be able to run its functions, the brain actually constricts some of those vessels and doesn't bring as much blood flow to those areas.
I didn't realize it until after the game, and at that point I hadn't been educated on concussions in general, and it wasn't really something that was in the mainstream in sports. So our medical team assessed me with a concussion. I felt okay. It wasn't something that it seemed to be really affecting me. We had a bye week the following week. Our medical staff were kind of trusting me to give them the proper assessment, and I felt okay. I just hadn't gone through that experience. So I think I came back too early and ultimately took another hit to the head. At the start of the game, I got hit, played through halftime, and then as soon as I got to halftime, kind of felt the effects of it. So I was in a tough place for probably 2 to 3 months before I could actually start to do anything physically, and it was a tough road.
So if you start returning to things in your life that have too much energy demand, what happens is you're going to feel symptoms. That's the best way your brain can tell you the energy demand is too much for what your brain can do in those functions.
So the first one was the worst one that I had, and the symptoms that I had were hard to manage every day. The second one was in 2009, so about a year later, and then ultimately retired in 2012 at 29 years old.
Very nice goal here by Carey.
I felt really good and strong and healthy, and was approaching it that I would probably continue to play. And the medical staff that I was with in Toronto, along with others that I had seen, had kind of worked together and ultimately made a decision to say this was what's best for Dan. Knowing and thinking that you still were capable of playing, I think that's the hardest thing. There's some that have to retire due to their age, and they no longer are able to compete, and that wasn't my experience. It was because I had to be kind of smart with it and know that if I was continuing to play and push through it, then there might be, longer term effects that I didn't want to be dealing with.
What we know from an athlete returning too soon is it can have many effects. It can increase symptoms, it can prolong recovery. We've seen an increase in other musculoskeletal injuries, but it could also have some catastrophic events that we've come to know as second impact syndrome. Second impact syndrome is what happens when there is a bleed that's going on in the brain. This could be a slow bleed from an injury, and they experience symptoms like they would with a concussion. Instead of a functional injury, they're actually having a structural injury. But the problem is if they go back and play in that game or that practice and they sustain another hit or another fall, we could result in something called second impact syndrome, which basically increases that brain bleed and can be catastrophic.
So we're going to show you a picture of when Dad and Mom, we took a picture on our wedding day of when it was our lacrosse stick.
Looking back, I appreciate and I trust that they were right. And, my wife, we met playing lacrosse in college. She has a lacrosse background and played Division I as well. So we weren't always married through that process, but we had a future together, and we wanted to make sure that we're doing what's best for all of us. It was our future kids at the time. We didn't know who they would be or if we'd have kids, but that was our expectation and hope. So they ultimately wouldn't clear me to play, and I respect the decision.
Dad got his stick from when he played, and I got mine.
The key is returning safely and really safeguarding yourself as an individual and an athlete for the long term, and not letting one more practice or one more day be the reason that you don't recover.
You kind of grow up, for me, you just had that mentality that you got to be tough and you got to go back in and play. And I tried to do that, and ultimately it didn't work out for me. So don't ever rush it. I think that's the biggest thing and the lesson that I had to learn. And unfortunately, if I had known that and waited a little bit longer, then maybe I wouldn't have been having to deal with it for as long as I did.
Most concussions are better within 2 weeks for an adult over age 18, or within a month for those under 18. So I think people need to remember recovering from this is going to be successful with the proper medical assessment and treatment.
General Manager and Vice President of Lacrosse Operations of the Rochester Knighthawks, Dan Carey.
To end playing something that you love so much is going to be difficult, but knowing that there's other opportunities to continue to be involved in the sport, it's kind of the next best thing.
This is our new identity.
When it comes to the Knighthawks, this is just a dream job for me, and I love every second of it. We have a great group of people that we're surrounded by, and our players and our staff. It's something that I cherish and I don't take for granted, and I appreciate every day that I get to do this for my living. I'm also the general manager for the men's field lacrosse for Lacrosse Canada, which is definitely a privilege of mine. And I was fortunate enough to be able to play in 2007 for Team Canada, and the pride that you take to wear your country's flag on your jersey is pretty cool. So I'm really grateful that I'm able to give back to my country. Those are kind of the two big things for me. And then outside of that, I'm a fan. I love to watch, and I try to help out when I'm around to help out with my kids' lacrosse.
Daddy!
It's so cool to watch my kids just grow up in general, and whether they play lacrosse or not, as long as they're happy and healthy, that's the biggest thing for me. It is a bonus to see them play lacrosse, and I was fortunate enough to be able to coach my daughter the first time she played, and my son actually a few days ago just had his first lacrosse session. So they both love it, and they make little comments every now and then. Like my daughter said before tucking her into bed the other night that she wants to play lacrosse her whole life. And it's really not us trying to push it on them, they're just exposed to it. But for me, the life lessons, and the lifelong friendships that I have, that's my biggest hope for them, is that they can have those experiences and the type of relationships that I hope they have, and some of that might be due to sports. Knighthawks jersey.
That's the most important thing.
Everyone on the team has a role in helping that athlete recognize a concussion, refer to a medical assessment, and help with the rehabilitation and getting that athlete back on the field safely. It starts with preseason education and the importance of a harmonized protocol to educate all of the stakeholders in the game, which means the player, the parents, the coaches, the organization. Everyone receives concussion education before the season starts. After preseason education, we need a plan for recognizing a concussion. The next thing is removal from play. We know now that an athlete removed from play should not go back into play within that 24 hours and until they've had a medical assessment. Then a proper medical assessment will be done by a physician or a nurse practitioner in their office setting. So the next step is kind of that early care. How do we manage those acute symptoms? These are included in our Canadian guidelines.
Congrats, buddy. Welcome to the team. The advice that I would have for anybody that is dealing with it or has to go through a concussion is, make sure that you're listening to the professionals that have the experience. And as an athlete, being honest with your coach or your parent is number one, because there is some signs and symptoms that they can see, but then there's some that they can't. I know that if it's one of our players that's dealing with it, my number one priority is to make sure that they're given more time. I don't want to see anybody push through something or come back too quickly when it comes to concussions, because any injury for that matter, but I do have that personal experience that I don't want to see anybody else have to go through. We just selected you, so I wanted to welcome you to the Rochester Knighthawks. You're welcome.
I would say there's two main takeaways that I hope each athlete hears. Number one, if you think you have a concussion, even if you're not sure, remove yourself from play and get the proper assessment done before returning back to sport. And the second message is concussions, just like any other sports injury, these are treatable. These are things that we can help you recover from. I expect athletes to fully recover from a concussion. So I want people to know that there is hope in their concussion and they are going to return to the sport they love.